Anthony Iannelli.
United we stand.
Zutu Ibis.
Jonathan Eel P.
Michael Eichen.
You can see that we're now going to go back to the Pentagon and listen to the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld.
Members of Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished foreign guests, family members, General Myers, and the Pentagon family, welcome. We're here today to honor those who died in this place and to rededicate ourselves to the cause for which they gave their lives, the cause of human liberty. In a sense, we meet on a battlefield. If it does not appear so today, that is because of the singular devotion of the men and women who work day and night to fulfill a solemn vow that not one stone of this building would be out of place on this anniversary. We thank you for your dedication and your accomplishment. But 1 year ago, this was a battle zone, a scene of billowing smoke, towering flames, broken rock, and twisted metal. It says much about our nation and the fierceness and resilience of the American people that were we not here now in this solemn ceremony, a visitor passing would see no hint of the terrible events that took place here but 1 year ago today. But we must not forget what happened here. Dedicated men and women came here on a clear September morning to serve their country, and then, in an instant, were taken from us. We gather today to remember them, but we're here for another purpose as well, to mark that first anniversary of a day that will be remembered by history and commemorated by successive generations, so long as we remain free people. For a battle was joined on that day, a battle still unfolding between a nation of free people and forces that seek to plunge that nation, and indeed the free world, into the darkness of tyranny and terror. We assemble today to ask what has been accomplished in the name of those who died and on behalf of those who live. 1 month after the attacks, our Commander-in-Chief came here to the Pentagon to speak to us, to console us, and to encourage us for the struggle still ahead. Of the terrorists, Mr. President, you said they dwell in dark corners. With patience, the terrorists will be pursued. They will be isolated, surrounded, until there's no place to run, to hide, or to rest. Well, to the men and women of the armed forces, this you are doing. In Afghanistan, you have rescued a country and liberated a people. You've rooted the terrorists out of the caves and the shadows. You are performing heroically. Know that the American people value what you do for our country. In this past year, some of your comrades have given their lives in the defense of freedom, and we remember each of them today. And to their families, we offer our sympathy and thank you for the love of country that you instilled in each of those extraordinary human beings. And we remember in our prayers each of the Allied soldiers who have fallen on the field of battle. From the first moments of this struggle, America knew she was not alone. Support came from every corner of the world. Mr. President, the coalition you have assembled is truly remarkable. Some 90 nations, literally half of the world, have joined in this effort, the greatest military coalition ever assembled in human history. Many coalition partners are here today, and we say to you, thank you for standing with us. And please extend our gratitude to your fellow citizens. Tell them how much we value their friendship and their steadfastness. In the past year, we've been awakened to our vulnerabilities, made conscious of the dangers we face in this new century. That awakening came at a terrible price, but the terrorists aspire to even greater destruction. unless they are stopped, the light of history will fade from this day, turning its gaze instead to subsequent days, when not thousands, but tens of thousands of lives could be lost. The road ahead is long, but while we have not yet achieved victory, we know in one important sense that the terrorists who attacked us have already been defeated. They were defeated before the first shot was fired in Afghanistan. They were defeated because they failed utterly to achieve their objectives. The terrorists wanted September 11th to be a day when innocents died. Instead, it was a day when heroes were born. The terrorists wanted September 11th to be a day when hatred reigned. Instead, it was a day when we witnessed love beyond measure. We saw it in the rescue workers who rushed into burning buildings to save lives, knowing they might never emerge. We saw it in the passengers on Flight 93, who learned what was happening and decided it was better to fight and die in a grassy Pennsylvania field than allow the terrorists to reach our nation's capital. And we've seen it every day since, in the service of those who have risked their lives and given their lives to stop terrorism. The terrorists wanted September 11th to be a day when free people learned fear and self-doubt. Instead, it was a day when a sleeping patriotism was awakened in this country. Even as they wiped away their tears, Americans unfurled their flags. They flew them from seemingly every house and car, in schools and parks and playing fields. And in town squares all across the nation, citizens gathered to light candles and to pray.
As they are praying at this moment, it is 9:59, the moment at which the South Tower in New York City collapsed. And as the Secretary of Defense continues, people in New York remember that minute in so many different ways. And we listen to a young woman who remembers her father. Her name is Brittany Clark.
This song makes me feel like my daddy is speaking to me. I give you this one thought to keep. I am with you still. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on the snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not think of me as gone. I am with you still in each new dawn.
We think on this occasion the Secretary of Defense will not mind giving way to young Beverly Clark. And this may be the most amazing picture, at least seen from this position, we've been aware of all day, reminding us again of the number of people involved. As the names are read in New York City, the families just go down that ramp, which has been there for some time, to what was the absolute heart of the cauldron on 9/11 and pay their families personal respects, put a rose,
Richard John Kelly Jr.
and just in many cases just stay there together with themselves. The names continue to be read here, and in a moment we'll go back to Washington to listen to the President George Bush.
Timothy Colin Kelly.
Robert Clinton Kennedy.
Thomas J. Kennedy.
John R. Kehoe-Hain.
Ralph Kershaw.
Ronald T. Kerwin.
Howard L. Kestenbaum.
Douglas D. Ketchum.
Ruth Ellen Kettler.
Boris Khalif.
Sarah Khan.
Timur Firaz Khan.
Rajesh Khandelwal.
Oliva Kemrat.
Salih Ku.
Michael Keeper.
Satoshi Kichuchihara.
Andrew J. Hun Kim.
Lawrence D. Kim.
Mary Jo Kelman.
Heinrich Kimming.
Amy R. King.
Andrew M. King.
Robert King Jr.
Lucille Teresa King.
Lisa King Johnson.
Brian Kenny,
Takashi Kinoshita,
Chris Michael Kirby,
Howard Barry Kirschbaum,
Glenn David Kerwin,
Helen Crossan Kittle,
Richard Joseph Claus,
Peter Anton Klein,
Alan David Kleinberg,
Karen Joyce Klitzman,
Ronald Philip Clifford,
Evgeny Niezev,
Andrew Knox,
Thomas Patrick Knox,
Rebecca Lee Colby,
Deborah A. Kobus,
Gary Edward Kochiley,
Frank J. Kostner,
Ryan Cohart,
Vanessa Kolpak,
Irina Kolpakova,
Suzanne Kontratenko,
Aye Kone,
Bon Chi Aku,
Dorota Kopitsko,
Scott Ko Pitko,
Bohan Kostic,
Danielle Pusolis,
David P. Cobbleson,
John J. Kren,
William E. Krukowski,
Lee Ud Mi La Se Du,
Shakar Kumar,
Kenneth Compel,
Frederick Kuo Jr.,
Patricia Koras,
Nauka Kushatani,
Thomas Kufikias,
Victor Corky,
Ku E Va E Ku Ak,
Angela Reed Height,
Andrew LaCourte,
Catherine L. Laverie,
Ma Naud Lackman,
James Patrick Ladley,
Joseph A. LaFosse,
Jeanette Louise LaFond Menachino,
David LaForge,
Michael LaForte,
Alan Charles LaFrance. God bless America.
Juan Lafuente.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, George W. Bush.
One year ago, men and women and children were killed here because they were Americans. And because this place is a symbol to the world of our country's might and resolve. Today we remember each life. We rededicate this proud symbol, and we renew our commitment to win the war that began here. The terrorists chose this target hoping to demoralize our country. They failed. Within minutes, brave men and women were rescuing their comrades. Within hours, in this building, the planning began for a military response. Within weeks, commands went forth from this place that would clear terrorist camps and caves and liberate a nation, and within 1 year, this great building has been made whole once again. Many civilian and military personnel have now returned to offices they occupied before the attack. The Pentagon is a working building, not a memorial. Yet the memories of a great tragedy linger here. And for all who knew loss here, life is not the same. the 184 whose lives were taken in this place. Veterans and recruits, soldiers and civilians, husbands and wives, parents and children. Left behind family and friends whose loss cannot be weighed. The murder of innocents cannot be explained, only endured. And though they died in tragedy, they did not die in vain. Their loss has moved a nation to action in a cause to defend other innocent lives across the world. This war is waged on many fronts. We've captured more than 2,000 terrorists. A larger number of killers have met their end in combat. We've seized millions in terrorist assets. We're reorganizing the federal government to protect the homeland, yet there's a great deal left to do. And the greatest tasks and the greatest dangers will fall to the armed forces of the United States. I came to the presidency with respect for all who wear America's uniform. Every day, as your commander-in-chief, my respect and that of our nation has deepened. I have great confidence in every man and woman who wears the uniform of the United States of America. I am proud of all who have fought on my orders, and this nation honors all who died in our cause. Wherever our military is sent in the world, you bring hope and justice and promise of a better day. You are worthy of the traditions you represent, the uniform you wear, the ideals you serve. America is counting on you, and our confidence is well placed. What happened to our nation on a September day set in motion the first great struggle of a new century. The enemies who struck us are determined, and they're resourceful. They will not be stopped by a sense of decency or a hint of conscience, but they will be stopped. A greater force is amassed against them. They are opposed by freedom-loving people in many lands. They are opposed by our allies who have fought bravely by our side. And as long as terrorists and dictators plot against our lives and our liberty, they will be opposed by the United States Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force, and Marines. We fight as Americans have always fought, not just for ourselves, but for the security of our friends and for peace in the world. We fight for the dignity of life against fanatics who feel no shame in murder. We fight to protect the innocent so that the lawless and the merciless will not inherit the earth. At every turn of this war, we will always remember how it began and who fell first. The thousands who went to work, boarded a plane, or reported to their post. Today, the nation pays our respects to them. Here and in Pennsylvania and in New York, we honor each name and each life. We ask God to bring comfort to every home where they are loved and missed. And on this day, and on every day, may He watch over the United States of America. God bless.
President with a great many members of the Congress and the senior command, as well as everyday folk in attendance, telling the country that the people who died at the Pentagon were killed because they were Americans, and that the Pentagon is the symbol of the country's might and resolve.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, who has given us this good land, help us never to forget our September 11th wake-up call. Lord, you awakened us to a deeper appreciation of freedom's high cost. You awakened us to see the heroism in ordinary Americans who face the horrific with courage conceived in faith's womb. You awakened us to rededicating our lives to making the American dream more than rhetoric, but reality. Lord, forgive us when we have failed to transform our creeds into our deeds. Help us to be up and doing for liberty's cause. May Todd Beamer's words, "Let's roll," illuminate the path ahead. Lord, let us roll toward bringing hope and healing in the midst of despair and hope. Let us roll toward bringing unity where we find division. Let us roll toward bringing your peace on earth. In the days to come, Lord, challenge us when our dreams come true because they are too small. Challenge us when we forget that righteousness brings favor and that truth crushed to earth will rise again. Challenge us, Lord, when we arrive safely simply because we have sailed too close to the shore. Make us indeed one indivisible nation, sustained by your loving providence, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Rear Admiral Barry Black, the Chief of Chaplains for the U.S. Navy. We've seen him in public ceremonies before. Very eloquent man.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean. bless America.
There's nothing quite like God Bless America to transform the mood of a crowd of Americans, even as they stood outside the Pentagon there and watched the empty man formation fly overhead. President, as we said, is going to be everywhere today. He started at the White House this morning for the first moment of silence, now to the Pentagon, then he's off to Shanksville in Pennsylvania. They are in the middle of their ceremony out there now, and it won't be long before he comes to pay his respects to the people and victims of New York.
Please be seated.
Our Pentagon correspondent John McWethy is there this morning, obviously, and he was there a year ago today. John, I said earlier, and I was struck, and it may well be that it comes out of something I was listening to you talk about earlier in the week, that they wanted this ceremony to be right where the Pentagon has been rebuilt, ahead of schedule.
Ahead of schedule, under budget by $250,000. They have done a remarkable job. $250 million, Peter. They have 10 to 12,000 people jammed in here. People have been waiting in line for hours and hours to participate in the kind of ceremony that the military is so good at doing. Words like duty, honor, and sacrifice mean something very special to this community.
John, the Secretary of Defense gave a speech which looked forward, even more so than the President did.
The administration, Peter, as you know, is getting ready for yet another war. The General Tommy Franks, who is head of Central Command, briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff for 3.5 hours yesterday. Part of that had to do with the war plan aimed at Iraq. So there is a lot of preparation for another phase that this administration is now engaged in.
Thank you, John. Check in briefly at the White House as well with our White House correspondent, Terry Moran. Terry, any number of people have observed in the last few days, and there are many different opinions as to whether or not this last year and the event a year ago today has changed George W. Bush significantly. You've been there for the year. Any thoughts?
Well, Peter, that is a question frequently asked. My own sense, following him day after day, is that he himself hasn't changed that much. But his presidency has been utterly transformed. It has a purpose that it frankly lacked going into September 11th. There was a kind of vague ambition to do good, a tax cut that was frankly cooked up during the heat of a political campaign, and a slogan, compassionate conservatism. Covering President Bush prior to September 11th, one was struck on occasion that he didn't seem entirely engaged in his duties. That's just one reporter's observation. You never get that sense now. There is a focus and an intensity and a mission. There's no question about it. And for the team, for the administration, It is impossible to overestimate the impact of September 11th. It forged a bond of unity and wartime comradeship among the highest echelons of this administration that has disciplined them and lessened the degree of bureaucratic infighting that you usually see in Washington and made them a much more effective team.
Thank you, Terry. Joined now by another of my colleagues in Washington, George Stephanopoulos. George, cannot say hello to you the first time without acknowledging that you bring life into the world just a day or so ago. Congratulations on your first child, you and your wife. A lot of people have talked in the last few days about whether or not the president is veering off course now with this campaign against Iraq and losing sight of the campaign against terrorism, which they talked about so extensively at the Pentagon.
Not only the campaign against terrorism, Peter, but also the more focused, specific campaign against al-Qaeda. And a lot of people warned that once you define the war as a war against terror anytime, any place, that would create tensions, not only in the global coalition that Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld talked about just a few moments ago, 90 nations, but also here at home. And you've seen those questions start to be raised now as the president sets the path towards a war with Iraq. More questions from our allies, more questions from the Democrats in Congress than you had in the immediate days after September 11th. But what you're seeing him do today and Secretary Rumsfeld do today is draw on the grief and the anger and the emotions of last year to galvanize the nation for the fight ahead.
Thank you, George. As the president said there at the Pentagon, the attacks on the Pentagon and on the country are still, of course, reciting the names. I said earlier, this is a tradition which dates to the Civil War, certainly very common during World War I, when bodies were not recovered. It wasn't possible to recover organized bodies, and so the names stand in for the bodies. And this particular sight this morning of the families coming together here, the families and the relatives of those who died at the Trade Center, because the question for so many people is today, is this a day that is desperately sad for them? Is this a day that makes it better? Is there closure? Is there transition? I mean, it seems like the entire world is asking them this question anytime they get near it. But it's fairly evident as we listen to the names for just a moment and look at these people again that there is comfort for them there.
Charles Anthony Murphy.
Christopher W. Murphy.
Edward Charles Murphy.
James Thomas Murphy.
Robert Eddie Murphy Jr.
Kevin James Murphy.
Patrick C. Murphy.
Raymond E. Murphy.
John Joseph Murray.
John Joseph.
In New York City, they're going to be reading the names for a couple more hours. They didn't read them at the Pentagon, as you noticed. That was a decision made before today, of course, not to read the names. But they have read them in Shanksville, and because there are not only these three events, but so many events in many parts of the world, it's impossible for us to stay and hear the whole list. But they are all available at abcnews.com.
Ladies and gentlemen,
it is worth looking at that list time and time again to be absolutely reminded of the magnitude of the attacks a year ago today. That's the president, of course, on his way to Shanksville, and that is Ground Zero in New York. People streaming to and from. The change in that particular location in the last year is extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people have come to New York from around the country and spent some time there,
Laura and Niera.
as they are today.
Nelson.
David William Nelson.
James Nelson.
Michelle Ann Nelson.
Peter Allen Nelson.
Oscar Francis Nesbitt.
Gerard Terrence Nevins.
Renee Lucille Newell.
Christopher Newton Carter.
Kapinga Nagula.
Nancy Yuen Lee.
Jody Nicolo.
Kathleen Ann DeCasco.
10:29 Eastern Time. A year ago today, the North Tower collapsed.
Martin S. Nidera,
Alfonso Joseph Ledimeyer.
Frank
For
John Neistat
They
Jr.,
continue to read the names in New York, and I suspect will continue to do so for maybe another hour and a half or more. We go to Shanksville, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, where at 10:06 a year ago, United Airlines Flight 93, which had left Newark, New Jersey on its way to San Francisco, crashed in the Pennsylvania countryside, and where many thousands of people have gathered today. Another missing man formation in the skies over Pennsylvania. They've heard a 21-gun salute. They've heard a Marine trumpeter play taps. They've seen 40 white doves released to represent the fallen heroes. Claudia Benack and the Johnstown Symphony Orchestra singing God Bless America. How proud she looked to sing it on this occasion. Shanksville has seemed very far away for many people in the country, and even for some of the family members of those 40 people who died on United Flight 93. It has seemed distant, and they'd often felt themselves distant from the country and not always appreciated in quite the same way. We hope it's different today. ABC's Dan Harris is there. Dan?
Hi, Peter. A couple of hundred people here, possibly in the thousands, maybe not as many as had originally been predicted, especially given the fact that there is a fierce cold front moving in, a lot of wind as well. Standing behind me here, standing in front of, rather, a temporary memorial set up over the last year. It's really grown up spontaneously here. One of the most powerful things are some writing, a whiteboard from family members who came here yesterday in a private ceremony. I'm going to read one thing from Sarah Rothenberg to her father, Mickey. Daddy, you gave me life and so much more. I'm so lucky to have had you in my life for 22 years. I will never stop loving you. Peter?
Dan, one of the things that strikes me about Shanksville is how spontaneous it has been. I mean, Shanksville's, sort of on the road to nowhere in one respect, and yet people have found it and left the artifacts of grieving and affection and admiration day after day after day.
So many artifacts, so many leaving, so many offerings that the locals have had to take them away, and it's constantly replenished, this temporary memorial. They're cataloging all of the things that have been left, from toy Tonka trucks, from baseball hats to firefighter helmets, to balloons and cards and placards, and of course American flags. They are cataloging that for a permanent memorial, and discussions about what that permanent memorial will eventually be are taking place right now.
And it's a little difficult to bring it up at the moment, but there's been some tension between the families of those who died on that particular flight and officialdom or bureaucracy about how they will be honored. Do you sense any of that today?
We sensed it certainly yesterday when we spoke with some of the family members after they had come to the crash site for a private tour. There is an effort in Congress to give the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest civilian honor that Congress can bestow, to only certain members, certain passengers on Flight 93. Those would be the passengers who it can be determined actually fought back against the hijackers. Many of the families are very upset about this. They say it's impossible to determine who did what on board Flight 93, and that in any event, everybody who was on that flight is a hero and deserves to be recognized.
Thanks, Dan, very much. Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The decision on that gold medal is going to be made by the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, though I suspect, and I think I'll check in with my colleagues in Washington, George Stephanopoulos, as to whether or not ultimately the political wave of sympathy and respect, George, for all of the people who've suffered, not only who died on the flight, but relatives of the flight, whether or not the politicians will finally decide to come and honor everybody. The families have certainly, as Dan Harris says, exerted a good deal of pressure. I'll get back to George in just a second. Ground zero again.
James, Matthew, Patrick.
We're joined at Ground Zero at the moment by a quite unusual man, or put it this way, a journalist who's had very unusual access. His name is Will Langewiesche, and he got unprecedented access to this site throughout the entire operation, from the time the rescue and recovery operation began all the way through the cleanup, basically until today. He wrote a 3-part series for the magazine, The Atlantic Monthly. It's going to be published a little later this month. Bill, can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
This takes you back, I know, today and forward. Just give us your early thoughts about the day.
The day today, you mean?
Yeah.
1 year is a lot of time, and I think the country has come a long way since then. The site certainly has. I've been sitting down looking out here, thinking about all the changes that are ongoing now as the cleanup moves toward reconstruction. It's been a remarkable process of American initiative and energy, and something that I think that none of us really could have expected to succeed as well as it did.
All sorts of people have been to Ground Zero. All sorts of people have reported on it, not with the access that you had. What did you learn that the rest of us might have missed?
I saw this spontaneous creation here, this private world inside the perimeter at Ground Zero, where people were allowed to run with their good ideas, where order was not brought in from the outside, but the solutions were created on the inside. It was like this great grand experiment in American life. I saw that early on, and it was a lesson for me in the strength of this country at this time in its history.
Were you struck by how few people in the final analysis were actually found?
That was not a surprise, to tell you the truth. I think that we all knew that from the beginning. Given the level of destruction here, anyone who was in the pile underground, as I was often, or on top, knew that the extent of destruction meant that many, many people simply had disappeared. The sad and difficult part is that, of course, for the people, for the individuals, the families who did lose people and who have not recovered their identities and their bodies, For them specifically, that's a very, very difficult thing. But for all of us in general, it's really not news that many people disappeared forever at that point.
I know it took you 3 long articles in the Atlantic Monthly to describe what it was like, but if you would this morning, what was it like underground?
It was a chaos underground. It was dark, of course. In the beginning, it was very dusty because collapses were ongoing and there was fire, so it was smoky. Mostly it was a confusion, and at its most confused, it was almost indecipherable. There were just cracks. You were crawling and moving through tight spaces. And in other places, it was really quite coherent. I mean, for instance, the PATH Railroad, the commuter railroad station here, which was much photographed, looked like it always had. It was pretty much, about half of it was untouched. So there was a lot of variation underground, and it was hard to know what was most poignant, the extreme destruction or the places that were in fact not destroyed but were coherent reminders of the life that had gone on there before.
I read in one of your pieces that in fact it was in some respects a competitive environment too, and that as unified as it looked to us on the outside, there were resentments and there were jealousies.
There certainly were, and that's really part of the American deal too, isn't it? I mean, the idea that this would be just one unified site is naive. That this is a country which draws strength from disagreement, and that was certainly happening here at the Trade Center site. You wouldn't want to overplay that, but it was happening, of course, and it was a good thing. I mean, it was a creative force.
Well, many thanks, William. It's really nice to have you, and you've made a really interesting contribution to journalism and to the history of this period in the country with your articles and subsequent book on Ground Zero. He got extraordinary access, unlike anybody else. He's persistent, hung around, and it's a very gripping portrait of what he's actually done. Now, we said earlier this morning that this is not a commemoration by any means exclusive to the United States. There's tons of things happening all around the world. I don't think there's any part of the world today which is immune to this particular anniversary. And ABC's Bob Brown has joined us to put together periodically throughout the day the events that are going on elsewhere.
When September 11th began on the other side of the world, it began with commemorations both solemn and improvised. On Australia's Gold Coast, a crowd led by firefighters put on colored T-shirts to form an American flag in a place called Surfers Paradise. At St. Luke's Church in Auckland, New Zealand, this choir helped start one of the only worldwide events. It is called the Rolling Requiem, in which choirs will perform Mozart's Requiem beginning in every time zone at 8:46 a.m., the time the first airplane struck the World Trade Center. It was a concert-goer in Seattle, Washington, who suggested the Requiem be sung in honor of those who died at the World Trade Center. There were moments of silence throughout the world. 91 countries lost citizens in the attack. In the U.S., on a day many felt was too painful to relive, whose images still are not distant enough, the things that will distinguish many commemorations outside of New York are their unique grassroots origins. In Cincinnati, crosses were raised and a pair of boots laid out for every firefighter lost on September 11th. At the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, an interfaith service included readings from the Bible, the Quran, the Upanishads, the Baha'i faith. In Houston, flight attendants and pilots from American and United Airlines were among those who placed carnations representing the victims of the attacks in a reflecting pool in Herman Square. In Boston, where the American and United flights that struck the World Trade Center originated, there were moments of silence among the passengers of today's flights. And at the Emma Booker School in Sarasota, Florida, the school President Bush was visiting last year when he learned of the attacks, students sang and recited poems at a special assembly. One of their choices was the poem One, written by a Texas school counselor, Cheryl Sawyer. As the soot and dirt and ash rained down, she wrote, we became one color. As we carried each other down the stairs of the burning building, we became one class.
Bob Brown getting us up to date with the rest of the country. Two things he catches my attention there, the names, of course, again, in poems. Billy Collins, very popular poet who's the current poet laureate in the country, wrote a poem which has been published, I know, in at least one newspaper, and it's about names, extremely appropriate for today. And I'm sure if you go to a website, you can find it. Maybe we can even try to find it and tell people where to find it before the end of the day. And the other thing which catches my attention there, which leads me to bring in our John Miller, who did such an extraordinary job for us in the last year, are the bagpipes. You know, I grew up in a family where the bagpipes were played all the time. And people don't like the bagpipes. They hate the bagpipes, except on occasions like this. And their tradition in the fire department and in the police department in America is as deeper even, or deep even, as much as it is in Scotland.
It is, and the bagpipes, the pipe and drum corps of the NYPD in particular, they come out certainly more often than they would like to for the funerals of fallen officers and for the retirement parties, for happy occasions too. But there has never been a period for them like this, having to work at 60 funerals involving police officers between the NYPD and the Port Authority Police, and of course the fire department's pipe and drum corps too. It's been an incredible year for both of them, and they've really held up with tremendous strength.
I wanted to ask you about that generally because, you know, I said earlier, this is a day that means different things to so many people. People wish to commemorate it in different ways. Some people have just gone to the woods. But your friends your friends, the cops and the firefighters, particularly the police, how have they, if you had to sort of bring them up to date today, what would you say?
You know, it's funny because of the stark differences. I have been with some of them when they have drowned their sorrows in bars. And they are still depressed, even now. I've been with others who have had an amazing ability to just kind of block it out and go back to work and get it done. And there are those who strike a balance between those two. They have good days and bad days. It largely has to do with how close those they lost were to them. The fire department has had a much more, on a larger scale, a devastating experience, but it's a closer-knit crew. They live together, they work together, and they've helped each other through it a great deal, and really stuck together with the widows, adopting them into the firehouse.
Firehouses, I noticed, were in some cases places where the only places widows could go and feel completely at home.
Which is true, and at the same time very strange, because unlike what we would think, that the wives and the kids come to the firehouse,
they were not welcome.
It was a place that really wasn't a place that they had been before this. It suddenly became a place that was now very open, where they were very welcome. And it was a place that they all later told me they really needed.
I want to go to ground zero now. Thanks, John. I'd like you to stay, if you would, because almost 700 firefighters, if I recall,
343 in New York.
Are still not back on the job, not those who died. More than 300 died, I know, but about 600 or 700 of them are not back on the job because they've got health problems or another. ABC's Don Dahler is down at ground zero still, and Don, I never forget the fact that we were sitting here unaware of what was happening when the towers were coming down, and you, being so much closer, got it. Are we right in looking at television this morning that this is a very, not only an intimate moment, but a supportive moment for the families there?
It is intimate and supportive, but even though it was a year ago, I can tell you that the emotions and the pain is still very real and raw for these folks. Just a few moments ago, there was a young lady who crossed the barrier of the memorial area to lay some flowers in the center, and as she was coming back out, she literally collapsed in grief and fell to her knees in the area down there at ground zero. So it has such a strong power still over their lives, and many of them are not even close to getting over what happened.
One of the things that strikes me about ground zero this morning is that the planners, again, and they've done a really good job, could not have anticipated what was going on. They built this circle of honor for people to stand outside and put flowers on the inside, and it's been people have invaded the space because they want to make it their own completely.
Well, they've also been surprised, frankly, with the number of people who have come to this area over the entire last year. They're averaging about 20,000 people a day visiting this area, far in excess of what anybody anticipated, which is why family members say it's very important for whatever building plans go forward on this site, that they do include a memorial where people can continue to come and pay their respects.
A little later today, we'll get into this whole question of memorials. It has been very civil, very thoughtful, but on occasions very tense in New York City. There were some early submissions for designs of what should happen to this site, and they were rejected out of hand by the families. The city has now revisited this. There is a limited competition at the moment for a new design, and everybody here in New York, I think, is mindful that it was a very difficult experience for the people in Oklahoma City, and there was a lot of bad blood as a result before they settled on something that was meaningful to all of them. So New York has been very careful. Don, thank you very much indeed. We're not everywhere in New York today, but I must tell you that we had an email from a friend who said that he arrived at Grand Central Station at about 8:42 this morning, and there's been a very, very large display at Grand Central Station, this great railroad station in New York City, on portraits of grief for a long time. And he just simply writes this: as the clock made its way to 8:46, commuters who at all other times seemed to personally embody the after effects of time-lapse photography, in other words, moving quickly, slowed and then stopped. And hundreds of people throughout the terminal stood motionless, put their briefcases down, and faced the memorial wall for fully 5 minutes. Most stood silently, many of them tearfully. There were no speeches, there were no ceremonies, simply minutes of great dignity. And this friend of ours said they had never seen Grand Central Station like that ever before. It's one of the truly beautiful places in the country. And today, an absolutely deeply important place for the people who were there as we marked various moments of silence around the country. John, we've only got a couple minutes before we go to do something else, but your take on the city, on New York City?
Well, I don't think we've seen the long-range effects. I recall vividly after the Oklahoma City bombing, everybody pitched in, everybody helped out, everybody grieved together. But it was a year later, and then another year later, that we saw the stark, frightening increase in divorce and alcoholism among the people who worked in the rubble there, in suicide, in emotional problems, in recurring nightmares. So many lives fell apart there. When you look at the Oklahoma City disaster, you compare the scale of the World Trade Center pit and what we may face there. I know counselors are trying to get ahead of it, but it's still something that has yet to be dealt with by so many.
Thanks, John.